Have you seen or channeled spirits? You see that portrait over there, that painting I've done of that woman in the background? Well, she speaks to me.
Hello my dear friends, how are you? I'm Arith Härger and today I'm going to answer a few questions. As you know, sometimes I ask for questions on my Instagram, here it is. I usually give a subject, a general theme, and people make their questions and, well, I pick a few random questions to answer them. This time the theme was strange, weird and out of the ordinary questions because, well, you know, we are getting closer to Halloween and it seems fitting. Yes, I know this video came out in April, but the moment Halloween comes to an end, every day that passes by is a step closer to Halloween again. These are not supposed to be very complex questions and not very complex answers, just for the fun of it, so I hope you enjoy this out of the ordinary Q&A. Let's get started. First question. Are you a sorcerer? This was literally the very first question I've been asked, and I got this one a lot for some reason. Well, I think the answer is always the same. No. Because if I'm not, well, I'm not, obviously. But if I am, the answer is still no. I think when a person really is something, and that something requires concentration, peace of mind, focus, obviously no one wants to have others eavesdropping, bothering, making a lot of questions, disturbing the peace in general, and certainly some works are better done in private and try not to draw any unnecessary attention and act as normal as possible. Just another regular person wandering about. Nowadays there are hundreds of thousands of witches, sorcerers, shamans, necromancers. It's a wonderful thing. Everyone shouting out loud they are this and that, and well, when someone brags a lot of being something, you know perfectly well they are not actually that at all. No one whose work needs the utmost secrecy, concentration, focus, or whose very existence and activity depends on not breaking the taboos will actually be around shouting out loud that they are doing this and that. Why do you speak of the gods in the past tense? Well, this isn't a particularly strange question, but I'll answer anyway because I think this one is important in a way. There seems to be this idea that when someone in the academic field, for instance, speaks of the gods in the past tense is either because they do not believe in the gods or because they think the gods are dead, so people speak in the past tense concerning the gods because of that. It's not that, obviously, but it's quite simple, really. When we speak about ancient civilizations and their entire cultural background, in our speech it's only normal to speak about everything in the past tense. It's just the basics of speech to try to properly deliver the message, because we are talking about things that were, not things that are happening right now. Besides, the conceptions of the divine have never been fixed in any moment of human history. So even when speaking about a specific deity, there is the need to speak in the past tense several times, since the conceptions of the divine progressively have changed quite a lot. Many gods were gods of something and then they became gods of something else, and again and again and again throughout history they became gods of something else entirely different. Even the names change, their cults change, everything about them has been in constant evolution. Weirdest experience during your practices? I think the fact of being alive in this very reality is already weird enough. Is Mother Nature in fact transsexual? We transport too much human qualities and emotions to the divine, and the anthropomorphization of animistic forces of nature led us to believe that the divine forces act just like humans do. But we live in a different reality, a physical reality, and as such we have physical needs. We need the physical in order to act on the physical. But if we study the conceptions of the divine and their origins, we understand that in an animistic worldview, the divine is purely spiritual and there is no need for the divine forces, the divine entities to have physicality in order to act on several realms of existence. Therefore, they do not possess a body, and everything that comes with the body and physical changes of the body and certain physical needs cannot be applied to spiritual entities. Strange questions, strange answers. Do you shave your ass? Yes, this was a question. Hey, I asked for strange, weird and out of the ordinary questions, so this person is in the right to ask such things, and obviously I'm in the right not to answer it. Book or CD that you are ashamed to own? Well, I own a lot of books, and some of which are pretty bad and some are absolute garbage, but I wouldn't know without reading them first, right? But, well, in terms of CD, music for instance, yes, I'm ashamed to own. Give me a moment. Yes, as I was saying, I am ashamed to own this particular CD from Blink-182 right here. I mean, I used to like Blink-182, the previous albums before this absolute garbage, but then they changed too much for my liking. And bonus music CD I'm ashamed to own, A Fire Inside. Good gods, this is so depressive. Anyway, I bought this almost 17 years ago. I was a disturbed teenager, please don't judge me. What was your last sacrifice? Getting out of the bed early while it's still nighttime outside. Good gods, that is truly a great sacrifice. If you could turn into a mythical animal, what would it be? Well, definitely a griffin. I've put some thought into this. I mean, hybrids always have more chances of survival, and besides, I could fly and live in the mountains and hunt in the forests below, and the greatest enemy of mythical and obviously non-mythical creatures is always mankind. So being a griffin does give me certain advantages to rip humans into pieces, but not as large as a dragon, so I would draw less attention. I'm talking as if I am an actual griffin already. What mythical story would you like to be in as the main character? Well, not as the main character, but I would definitely love to be part of Tolkien's Middle-earth. But with my luck, I would probably end up as an orc and get shot with an arrow in the first attempt to get out of a cave and smell the world. Why are Wiccans little bitter bitches? Well, I suppose there are little bitter bitches everywhere. Doesn't matter what religious or political or sports or spiritual beliefs or inclinations people have. Everyone is an asshole in their own way, at some point in their lives, in their own special way. If Darwin was wrong and we were not from monkeys, what animal would you have as an ancestor or as ancestors? Well, mate, I don't know what kind of ancestors you have, but mine aren't monkeys, that's for sure. According to proper scientific study of the evolution of the human being, we descend from a range of primates that went through a series of evolutionary processes, and before these primates, all the way back to more or less 120 million years ago, there was this tiny rat-sized mammal. So our great 120 million years old grandmother was a kind of a rat. But it's curious that in many tribal societies of the past, the bear used to be considered mankind's brother, due to the similarities in structure when the animal is standing straight up and walks on 2 feet, which is pretty interesting. Do you know of any sources suggesting that Vikings could be trans or non-binary? In terms of transsexuality, that isn't at all a new phenomenon in human societies, and we have plenty of evidences of that in the past. More noticeable in cross-dressing individuals, surely, in tribal societies, but also male figures playing the role of a woman in a variety of activities in ancient societies, as well as the necessity and wish to of change of roles in a variety of ceremonies of the past. So it's not something unheard of in ancient civilizations. And as I've said before, I myself have been on an archaeological Mesolithic context, and one of the greatest finds in there was precisely the male spiritual leader who played the role of the woman and cross-dressed, judging by the findings and the comparison with the objects and jewelry worn by men and by women. And this isn't the only case, obviously. This is the only case I have worked on, but there are plenty of situations like this in the past. Now, what is important to understand is that we have this tendency to transport subjects of the present into the past. And in the case of non-binary as a spectrum of gender identity, along with other modern terms to either describe gender or to not affirm gender, cannot be transported, obviously, into the past. What I mean with this is that we have a lot of modern terms to describe a variety of complex human behavior and self-identity, but those terms did not exist in the past. As a better example of this, it's like we call particular cultural groups as Celts or Greeks or Picts or Lusitanians or Slavs and so on and so forth. These people didn't call themselves by those names. The Celts didn't call themselves Celts. The Picts certainly didn't call themselves Picts, as these people had their own languages, their own tribes and clans and their own stories. So certainly in the past we have a lot of people more or less with the same desires and wishes we have nowadays. And in terms of sexuality and gender identity, people also had their wishes and their needs and the way to express themselves. But we cannot simply apply to them modern terms, since these people did not have such terms. In fact, as we take it from written sources, there was not the necessity to label themselves anything concerning their identity. Of course, aside from calling themselves by the name of their tribe or clan or group. It's we nowadays that are in desperate need of labels to affirm our identity. Because unfortunately, nowadays, people do not understand each other unless they can have a label that they can identify themselves with. This is why a lot of people ask me if I'm this or that, what is my religion, what is my spiritual path. And when I tell them that I do not follow any path but my own, there's no possible label they can put on me, and as such they get confused and don't understand me at all, because they cannot immediately label me and identify me as strictly something. Labels are too limiting, and I frankly think it's rather stupid to diminish the complexity of a human being to a single label and identify that person according to that label, as if anyone was strictly just something. I believe the human mind is much more complex than that and much more fluent. And in the meantime, I completely forgot what we were talking about. What is the weirdest question you have ever been asked? Well, probably, definitely, so far, the one if I shave my ass. I heard that Odin had no testicles. I don't think this is true, but is it? Gods save me. I mean, I kind of answered that question previously. Transporting human behavior and qualities, emotions and physicality into the divine just limits our perceptions of the divine itself. Well, in a way, yes, Odin doesn't have testicles, nor any other bodily categories for that matter. Have you ever practiced necromancy? If so, how did you feel while doing it? Necromancy is, in fact, a very interesting subject, and sadly it is very misunderstood, as it is something that was greatly demonized by several cultures, and modern movies and gaming haven't helped at all to demystify this highly complex spectrum of, let's say, magic, for lack of a better word. I didn't answer the question, did I? Well, it happens. Are you the son of some god or goddess? Odin, maybe. Well, not Odin, no. But in terms of our relation with the spiritual, and particularly with the spiritual entities we so label gods, I do believe all of us have the divine spark within ourselves, which turns us all into our own gods. And by knowing the gods inside us, we can better understand the gods outside us. Throughout all theologies, how many gods do you think are the same entities? Well, that's an interesting question, actually. It's clear that throughout the historical evolution of religions, there has been several moments of cultural syncretism. And of course, God or gods of a specific religion are the exact same gods of another religion, but just with different names and aspects according to the cultural background these religious conceptions have been incorporated into. So, what's really interesting, I think, is that we have been living on a moment in the history of religion, more or less since the early Middle Ages until our days, modern days, where there has been several religious constructions and reconstructions, a lot, and pick pieces of information here and there to make the foundations of such religions. And we have several cults that have changed the divine panorama several times. A lot, indeed. For instance, I'm not sure, probably you are familiar with cults and religious organizations that focus on the concept of the flame, of fire, as the spiritual principle of mankind. Well, it doesn't matter really. What matters is that such religious philosophies, as an example, forcibly make connections, links with cultural realities that didn't have any connections at all in the first place. For instance, Buddha, Hermes, Krishna, Odin, Jesus and the prophets, Zoroaster, Mohammed, and even the philosopher Confucius, Kongfuzo. In some religions, religious philosophies, they are all seen as the exact same being, as the exact same entity or the same persona, bringer of light and illumination and deep wisdom and knowledge, etc. Or they are all seen as the many sons of the same God. The point here is that many philosophies have greatly influenced many written works about religion. And then what comes to us are religious works that were created by people with a specific worldview, with specific religious beliefs and with specific religious philosophies. And the works about specific religions of specific cultures come altered to us and are presented to us not as they were originally in the past, but as they were forcibly thought to be by the person that wrote the work with a specific religious belief. I'm sure you are understanding where I'm getting with this. Without a doubt, there has been cultural syncretism in the past and continues to exist, and many deities of different pantheons, one way or another, are the same. but many more are not. And for several centuries, many forced connections have been created, connections that they weren't there to begin with. And as this channel is in great part about Scandinavian studies, once again I pick on the historical figure of Snorre Sturluson. His work, Prose Edda, isn't strictly how Norse mythology and pre-Christian Scandinavian religion actually was perceived. And we find in the archaeological record many things that go completely against Snorri's work. What he created in some aspects surely matches the religious past of Scandinavia, and also matches some Indo-European religious conceptions, and also matches even some animistic pre-Indo-European worldviews. But Snorre also created his work very much based on religious philosophies of his own time. Religious philosophies based not only on Christianized myths and perceptions, but also in Kabbalistic teachings, and on several Western philosophies and worldviews. This is one of the reasons why Snorre speaks about the Norse pantheon as having 12 gods, 12 main gods, and this was a tendency at the time, and we start to see many works always focusing on the number 12 and the 12 gods of different pantheons. And then we have pantheons with only 12 gods, and some of them were never seen as gods in the actual cultural past of the people such gods were worshipped by. Many of the gods in the Prose Edda are actually literary inventions, not just created by Snorre, but already the sources he had in hands during his time had already been tampered with. Some characters became gods, and some gods were forgotten as they have been replaced by new literary phenomena. This is precisely why Valhalla was shifted into Asgard, a divine realm, and high above, in a place of light. Valhalla, as we take it from the sources and several archaeological understandings and contexts, is that it was originally located in the underworld, in the realm of the dead, in hell, and was a specific hole for the dead, for a specific social class of dead people. But Snorre shifted Valhalla into a place of light, closer to the gods, on a high place, Asgard, to match philosophical teachings and tendencies of his own time, to equate with Mount Olympus, Mount Salvart of the Knights of the Grail, Meru of the Oriental, Mount Moria and Mount Sinai and Shambhala, all conceptions that place the sacred on a high place, the mountain of the gods, or a high place of holiness. So you see, this is why I tell you that it is of the utmost importance to make the comparative study of religions, so we can understand from the sources what is actually depicting the past and what are the inventions and recreations of the time when those sources were written. Your favorite deity shows up unexpectedly for dinner. Who is it and what do you offer them to eat? This is a funny one. Well, I sure hope it's a deity related to fertility and plenty. As much as I like to cook, it's true. Better to be the deity concocting all sorts of delicious food. Outside the box, why is Hecate worship in Wicca, a Nordic-based tradition? Precisely because it's not a Nordic-based tradition. Wicca is a neo-pagan religious construction that started to be based mostly on Celtic, Anglo-Saxon and classical antiquity religious pagan beliefs. Some pre-Christian Scandinavian religious beliefs were eventually incorporated via the Anglo-Saxon background, but in truth the focus on Scandinavian gods came rather late into Wicca, with the emergence of Asatru, which frankly began more like Wiccatru, as its members were coming from Wicca, and then there was this sort of competition between Ozothru and Wicca, trying to see which one had the truth of it and which one could be better. So instead of focusing on the actual pagan past and on things that actually matter, they were focusing on each other's ideas and were creating all sorts of links that never existed in the past, just to show that their ancestors already had that one thing before the ancestors of the others. Scandinavian gods got incorporated into Wicca rather late after the creation of this neo-pagan religious construction, Ozothru. Wicca in great part was also based on Christian teachings and Christian views of witchcraft from the Middle Ages, and as such the goddesses mostly worshipped within Wicca were actually either classical figures such as Hecate and Diana, perceived to be goddesses of witches, labeled so by the church itself, and also biblical or Judeo-Christian figures such as Herodias and Lilith, as well as medieval evolutions of Herodias such as the Italian Herodiad and the very late 19th century fictional character Aradia. What secret hidden talent do you have that you refuse to show people? Well, if it's a secret and if I refuse to show it, I'm not going to talk about it, am I? Have you ever had something so weird happen to you that you can still remember it today? Yes, many weird things have happened in my life. Some have left their mark, obviously. Some things no one will ever believe because naturally they weren't there to see it, but fortunately I have experienced things and more people were present and they saw it, they witnessed it, they felt it even. And that is what stays in waking memory, because it's quite satisfactory when others cannot possibly deny what you have experienced because they too have seen it and felt it. Have your use of the runes ever led you to unintended consequences? Runes, in my opinion, are mainly a way to interact with the higher self and to sharpen our own intuition. There's no need for the runes to have these specific unintended consequences linked to them. Unintended consequences are inevitable when we haven't given enough thought to choices we make. Unintended consequences, or any consequences at all for that matter, are purely the result of choice and action. What's your fetish? A gentleman doesn't discuss of such things. Have you ever done a spiritual session? I tell you what, when I was a child, I saw one of my grandmothers perform something, what I think it was a spiritual session. But for a time, she had a particular habit, more like a game, which was writing a letter to an Italian friend of hers miles and miles away. She wrote the letters, but she never sent them. And instead she would put the letter on an envelope and keep it in her drawer. A month later or so, from Italy, from her Italian friend, would arrive a letter answering the contents in the letter my grandmother had never sent. And sometimes it was the other way around. My grandmother answering a letter that had never come. It got to the point that they no longer sent letters answering the other one's letters that never arrived, but instead wrote them and kept them to themselves, and they were answering each other without actually sending any letter anymore. Letters stopped arriving, but they still communicated in a piece of paper kept in the drawer that never left the house, ever. What would you do if you had necromantic powers? What's this thing with necromancy all of a sudden? Are you on to me? Is that you under the table? My coven wants to do drugs for a ritual, but I don't. Should I? Well, if you don't want to do it, no one is forcing you to. Or are they? If they force you to do something that you clearly don't want, that means they are taking over your personal freedom, and if they do not respect you, if they not respect your choices, rest assured that they will never respect you as a person in any situation or any decision making. Just tell them to fuck off. Can you change a live sacrifice for a stuffed toy? I don't like blood. And then an emoji I cannot see because, well, my phone is too archaic to let me see advanced pictograms. Anyway, this is actually a very important question and an interesting question, obviously, that I won't develop that much in here, not today anyway, but we seem to have this sort of wrong notion that in the past people were sacrificing loads of animals and people to the gods and no control whatsoever. Yes, there were animal and human sacrifices, but in the archaeological context there are far more sacrifices of objects than anything else. Seriously, many objects that we nowadays perceive to be inanimate have been sacrificed quite often, more than anything else. I've said this plenty of times before. In fact, if you can, watch this video right here about making. The sacrifice of objects show an animistic understanding of the spiritual and the belief that objects contain essence, contain a spirit. The problem nowadays is that we live in a materialistic society and we mainly have a materialistic worldview in which everything is perceived to be physical and merely physical and inanimate. In the past, most sacrifices as offerings were of objects, of things that had great value, great personal value. And the objects were perceived to contain essence, spirit, magin, a life force. And by breaking the precious object, its essence was released. Watch my video on magin if you may, and I think you will better understand what I'm talking about in here. Talking with dead relatives. Is it possible? Well, yes, it is indeed. It's possible to have a connection with the ancestors, although personally I wouldn't recommend. Give me a second. One thing is honoring your ancestors, another completely different thing is actually be in contact with them, which I wouldn't recommend. But I shall talk about it and develop this idea some other day on a future video concerning necromancy. Is it possible to go on a shamanic trip and return without an arm? Oh, an arm, an actual limb, of course. Yes, well, it's entirely possible. Part of the initiation of a shaman is spiritual dismemberment, but well, it hardly has any consequences on the physical on those terms. Which do you most can't the list? I tell you what I can't. I can't answer this, whatever this is. Have you never played Halo 3? Yes, I never ever played it. In fact, I had to Google it to see what it was. Have you ever been aroused by a painting you have done? There it is, that's my fetish. No, it isn't, obviously. I'm only joking. But no, I'm not that desperate. I cannot talk about these things with that one painting here in the room. Yes, honey, you are the one. Please, don't kill me. Have you ever been stopped by another Christian that insulted you because you were a heathen? I've never had anyone bothering me so far for being a pagan, only here on YouTube. Because you know what? I don't have it written on my forehead. And it's not like I'm waddling about and shouting, "Hey, I'm a pagan." Besides, it seems we can no longer use the word heathen anyway, since apparently now certain companies just pick random words from the dictionary and have legal patent over such words. What a shame. I really wanted a shirt with big pink letters saying heathen. What's the most ominous or strange dream you have ever had. Being awake in this reality, it is definitely a pretty strange dream. Are you an Oz or boobs kind of guy? Right, this might sound strange and obviously old-fashioned, but I actually prefer women as a whole, not just parts of their body. I leave that for necromancers. What's your favorite painting to look at and why? I really enjoy Flatford Mill by John Constable. It brings out homely memories. Favorite position? Definitely lying down. I'm so tired. Alright, my dear friends, I hope you have enjoyed this video. If you want, follow me on Instagram and be attentive. Sometimes I ask for questions on specific subjects and you can ask away. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video. And as always, tack för idag.